The grand doors of Victoria Hale's wedding ceremony swung open at the most sacred moment. A man stepped inside, wearing a sharp black suit, his stride calm, his gaze unwavering. The ballroom went still. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is he?" Victoria narrowed her eyes, then let out a mocking laugh when she recognized the familiar face. Ethan Brooks, the poor cleaner she had jokingly invited. But as the eyes of her business partners began to shift, Victoria felt something slip from her grasp. The question now was not who he was. It was who would be laughed at today. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Brooks pushed his cleaning cart down the 40th floor of Hale Technologies, his footsteps quiet against the marble hallway. The tower rose above the city like a glass monument to ambition, each floor designed to remind anyone who entered that money-built empires. Ethan had worked here for 2 years, arriving before dawn and leaving after dark, moving through offices where decisions worth millions were made, while he emptied trash bins and wiped conference tables clean. He never complained. The job paid enough to keep his son fed, clothed, and in a decent school district. That was all that mattered. His son Tyler was 7 years old, small for his age, but bright in ways that made Ethan proud. Every morning before work, Ethan would pack Tyler's lunch, walk him to the bus stop, and watch until the yellow vehicle disappeared around the corner. Every evening, he would return home exhausted, but he would sit with Tyler at their small kitchen table and help with homework, asking questions about his day, listening to stories about playground games and spelling tests. Tyler never asked why they lived in a cramped apartment while other kids had houses. He never asked why his father came home smelling like cleaning chemicals. He trusted his father, and that trust was something Ethan would protect at any cost. Victoria Hale rarely noticed the people who cleaned her building. She moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, never been denied anything her intelligence and money could secure. She had built Hale Technologies from a startup into a major player in the industry, and she wore her success like armor. Her heels clicked across floors that Ethan had polished hours before. Her voice carried authority in boardrooms where partnerships worth 8 figures were negotiated over coffee he had brewed. She knew the names of her executives, her investors, her competitors. She did not know the name of the man who made sure her office was spotless every morning. One afternoon, Victoria stood in the executive lounge with 3 of her senior managers, discussing final arrangements for her wedding. The ceremony would take place in 3 weeks at the Grand Belmont Hotel, a venue that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. The guest list included tech moguls, venture capitalists, and politicians whose endorsements had opened doors that talent alone could not. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to reflect the image she had built for herself. Ethan entered the lounge to empty the trash, moving quietly along the perimeter of the room. He had learned to make himself invisible in spaces like this, to complete his work without interrupting conversations that were not meant for him. Victoria glanced at him briefly, then turned back to her managers. One of them, a man named Derek, smirked and gestured toward Ethan with his coffee cup. Derek said maybe they should invite the cleaning staff to the wedding, really give the event some diversity. The others laughed. Victoria tilted her head, considering the suggestion with amusement. She called out to Ethan, her voice bright with mockery. She asked if he would like to attend her wedding. Ethan stopped, his hand still gripping the trash bag. He looked at her without expression, his face calm. Victoria continued, saying it would be wonderful to have him there, that the event could use some real people, not just the usual crowd of executives and investors. Derek laughed louder. Another manager, a woman named Sharon, covered her mouth, but her eyes betrayed her entertainment. Victoria was performing now, enjoying the attention, the way her words made her colleagues lean in with anticipation. Ethan met her gaze and said he would be honored to attend. His voice was even, polite, without a trace of anger or humiliation. Victoria blinked, surprised by the simplicity of his response. She had expected resistance, maybe embarrassment, something she could twist into further amusement. Instead, he simply accepted, She recovered quickly, smiling as if his answer confirmed exactly what she had expected. She told him wonderful. She would make sure his name was on the guest list. Ethan nodded once, then returned to his work, lifting the trash bag and moving toward the door. The executives exchanged glances, their laughter fading into uncomfortable silence. After he left, Derek muttered that the man probably did not even understand he was being mocked. Sharon agreed, saying people like that lived in a different world, one where a wedding invitation from someone like Victoria Hale was an actual privilege. Victoria shrugged, already losing interest. She said it would be amusing to see him show up in whatever cheap suit he could borrow, standing awkwardly among people who spent more on their watches than he earned in a year. The conversation moved on. The invitation became a footnote, a small joke to be forgotten by the time the rehearsal dinner arrived. But Ethan did not forget. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with Tyler, helping him sound out words from a library book about astronauts. Tyler asked what was wrong, noticing the way his father stared at the page without really seeing it. Ethan told him nothing was wrong. Everything was fine. Tyler frowned, unconvinced, but he returned to his reading. Ethan watched his son, the way he mouthed each syllable carefully, the way his finger traced under the lines to keep his place. He thought about the invitation, the laughter in Victoria Hale's voice, the casual cruelty of people who believed their wealth gave them permission to humiliate others. He could ignore the invitation. No one would notice if he failed to show. Victoria had already forgotten about him by now, moved on to other details, other concerns. Not attending would be the smart choice, the safe choice. It would preserve his dignity, keep him from becoming a spectacle at an event designed to make him feel small. But as he sat there, watching his son practice reading, Ethan realized that ignoring the invitation would teach Tyler something he did not want him to learn. It would teach him that when powerful people mocked you, the correct response was to hide. It would teach him that dignity meant avoiding conflict, that self-respect required silence. Ethan did not want his son to grow up believing that. He wanted Tyler to know that a man could stand in a room full of people who thought they were better than him and still hold his head high. He wanted him to know that being poor did not mean being less. The world would try to teach Tyler otherwise, would try to convince him that his worth was measured by his bank account, or his job title, or the neighborhood he lived in. Ethan could not change the world, but he could show his son how to walk through it without bending. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan saved every extra dollar he could. He skipped lunches, worked double shifts when they were available, set aside money that would have gone toward small comforts. He told himself he was being foolish, that a suit would not change anything, that showing up to Victoria Hale's wedding would accomplish nothing except satisfying his own stubborn pride. But he kept saving. He found a second-hand shop downtown that sold quality suits from estate sales, garments that had belonged to men who no longer needed them. He tried on several before finding one that fit, a black suit with clean lines and no visible wear. It cost him $270, more than he had ever spent on clothing in his life. He brought it home and hung it in his closet, hidden behind his work uniforms. Tyler asked what was in the bag. Ethan told him it was something for a special occasion. Tyler wanted to see, but Ethan said, "Not yet, maybe later." The boy accepted this, trusting his father the way he always did. Ethan stood in the doorway of his bedroom that night, staring at the suit, wondering if he was making a mistake. He imagined walking into the Grand Belmont Hotel, imagined the faces of people like Derek and Sharon, imagined Victoria's mocking smile when she saw him. Part of him wanted to return the suit, take the refund, forget the entire thing. But he thought about Tyler again, thought about the questions his son would ask someday, when he was old enough to understand how the world worked. He thought about what he would say if Tyler asked him what to do when someone treated him like he did not matter. Ethan could not tell his son to fight back with words or fists, could not teach him to meet cruelty with cruelty. But he could show him that walking away was not the only option. He could show him that sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was show up. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and clear. Ethan woke early, made breakfast for Tyler, and dropped him off at his neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down, had agreed to watch Tyler for the afternoon. She asked where Ethan was going, dressed so nicely. He told her a work event. She smiled and told him he looked handsome. Tyler hugged his father and told him to have fun. Ethan held his son a moment longer than usual, then left before the boy could see the doubt in his eyes. He took the bus downtown, transferred twice, and walked the final 6 blocks to the Grand Belmont Hotel. The building rose before him like a fortress of marble and glass, its entrance flanked by columns that belonged in a museum. Valets in white gloves opened car doors for guests who arrived in vehicles worth more than Ethan would earn in 5 years. He watched them step out, men in tailored tuxedos, women in gowns that shimmered under the afternoon sun. They moved with the ease of people who had attended 1,000 events like this, people for whom luxury was ordinary. Ethan adjusted his tie, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the entrance. His heart beat steady in his chest. He was not here to make a scene. He was not here to embarrass Victoria or prove anything to her colleagues. He was here because his son deserved a father who did not bow to contempt. He was here because walking through those doors was the only way he could look Tyler in the eye and tell him that dignity was not something other people could take away. The doorman held the entrance open without expression. Ethan stepped inside. The ceremony hall stretched before him like a cathedral of glass and gold, chandeliers casting warm light across rows of white chairs filled with guests in expensive fabrics. At the front, beneath an arch of white roses and orchids, Victoria stood beside her groom, a man named Marcus Sullivan who ran a private equity firm. The officiant had just asked if anyone objected to the union. The room held its breath in the traditional silence. That was when the doors opened. Ethan walked down the center aisle, his steps measured, his expression neutral. He had not planned to arrive at this exact moment. The timing was accidental, the result of traffic and a delayed bus, but the effect was absolute. Every head turned. The rustling of silk and whispered confusion moved through the crowd like wind through grass. Ethan kept walking, found an empty seat in the back row, and sat down. He folded his hands in his lap and looked straight ahead. Victoria stared at him from the altar, her face frozen in an expression caught between shock and recognition. She knew that face. She knew it from hurried glimpses as she rushed past him in hallways, from peripheral vision as he emptied trash cans during meetings. But she had never seen him like this, dressed in a suit that fit him well, sitting among her guests as if he belonged. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. Then she laughed, a short sound meant to break the tension, to signal to everyone that this was somehow expected, somehow planned. Marcus leaned toward her and whispered something. Victoria shook her head, touching his arm to reassure him. The officiant cleared his throat and asked if everything was all right. Victoria smiled brightly and told him to continue. Everything was fine. The ceremony resumed, but the air had changed. Guests kept glancing back at Ethan, trying to place him, trying to understand why this stranger had walked in at the moment of objection. Ethan sat quietly, his eyes on the floral arch, his face giving nothing away. The ceremony concluded without further interruption. Victoria and Marcus exchanged rings, kissed to polite applause, and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. As they passed Ethan's row, Victoria's eyes found his for half a second. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn when she invited him 3 weeks ago. Something in that look made her grip Marcus's arm tighter. The reception took place in the adjacent ballroom, a space designed to hold 300 guests in comfort. Round tables draped in ivory linen filled the room, each centerpiece a small fortune in imported flowers. A string quartet played near the dance floor. Waiters moved through the crowd with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most families spent on dinner. Ethan entered the ballroom and stood near the entrance, watching the guests mingle, listening to their laughter and easy conversation. Derek spotted him first. The senior manager approached with a glass of champagne in hand, his expression a mixture of amusement and disbelief. He asked Ethan what he was doing here. Ethan replied that he was invited. Derek laughed and said he meant seriously. What was he doing here? Ethan repeated that Victoria had invited him 3 weeks ago in the executive lounge. Derek studied him, trying to determine if the man was being deliberately obtuse or genuinely did not understand the joke. Sharon joined them, her eyes sweeping over Ethan's suit with barely concealed surprise. She asked where he got the suit. Ethan told her a shop downtown. She pressed further, asking which shop, as if the specific name would reveal some trick, some explanation for how a cleaner could look this presentable. Ethan named the second-hand store. Sharon's smile tightened. She exchanged a glance with Derek that communicated what words did not need to. Victoria approached, Marcus at her side, trailed by several guests who had been congratulating the newlyweds. She stopped 3 feet from Ethan, close enough that others could hear, far enough to maintain a theatrical distance. She greeted him with exaggerated warmth, saying how wonderful it was that he could make it. Her voice carried across the nearby tables, drawing attention. Guests turned to see who she was addressing with such pointed enthusiasm. She asked Ethan how he was enjoying the wedding. He told her it was beautiful. She smiled and said she was so glad, that she had worried he might feel out of place, but clearly he had found something to wear that worked. A few guests chuckled. Derek grinned. Victoria continued, asking if he had borrowed the suit or if he owned it. Ethan told her he bought it. Victoria tilted her head in mock admiration, saying how impressive that was, that he must have saved up for quite a while. The words hung in the air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Marcus touched Victoria's elbow, a gentle suggestion that she move on, but she ignored him. She was enjoying this, enjoying the audience, enjoying the way her words made Ethan stand there while everyone watched. She asked if anyone had helped him pick it out, maybe given him advice on what would be appropriate. Ethan met her gaze and said he chose it himself. A man in his 60s stepped forward from a nearby table. His name was Robert Hutchins, and he had been one of Hale Technology's earliest investors, a partner whose backing had allowed Victoria to expand when the company was still finding its footing. He had made his fortune in manufacturing decades ago, starting with a single factory floor, where he had worked alongside his employees before building an empire. He looked at Victoria with an expression that was not quite disapproval, but something close. Robert asked Victoria if she knew this man. She told him yes, of course. This was Ethan Brooks, one of the cleaners at her building. She said it as if the title explained everything, as if it justified her tone. Robert turned to Ethan and introduced himself, extending his hand. Ethan shook it, giving his name in return. Robert asked how long he had worked at Hale Technologies. Ethan told him 2 years. Robert nodded and asked if he enjoyed the work. Ethan said it paid the bills. Victoria laughed, trying to reclaim control of the conversation. She told Robert that she had invited Ethan as a bit of fun, to add some diversity to the guest list, to show that she valued all her employees. Robert's expression did not change. He asked if inviting someone as a joke was how she valued her employees. The question was quiet, but sharp. Victoria's smile faltered. She said she had not meant it that way, that Robert was misunderstanding. Robert disagreed. He said he understood perfectly. He had spent 40 years working with people before he made enough money to stop working with his hands. He knew what it looked like when someone used their position to humiliate someone else. He turned to Ethan and asked if he had family. Ethan told him he had a son. Robert asked how old. Ethan said 7. Robert nodded and said that was a good age, that his own grandson was around that age. The exchange shifted something in the room. Other guests began to watch more carefully, their amusement replaced by discomfort. A woman in her 50s, a venture capitalist named Patricia Green, set down her champagne glass and moved closer. She asked Victoria if what Robert said was true, if she had really invited this man as a joke. Victoria tried to laugh it off, saying everyone was being too serious, that it was her wedding, and she was allowed to have a little fun. Patricia said she did not think humiliating someone was fun. She said she had worked with Victoria for 6 years, had helped her secure funding that kept the company afloat during a difficult quarter, and she had always respected Victoria's intelligence and drive. But this, Patricia continued, this was something else. This was cruelty, dressed up as humor. Victoria's face flushed. She told Patricia she was overreacting, that Ethan was fine, that he had accepted the invitation willingly. Ethan spoke then, his voice calm and even. He said Victoria was right. He had accepted the invitation willingly. He had come here knowing exactly what she thought of him, knowing what this was. Victoria looked at him, uncertain whether he was defending her or condemning her. Ethan continued, saying he came because he wanted his son to know that being poor did not mean accepting disrespect. He wanted Tyler to understand that a man could walk into a room full of people who thought they were better than him and still stand with his head up. The ballroom had gone quiet. The string quartet played on, oblivious, but no one was paying attention to the music. Guests at nearby tables had stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped pretending they were not listening. Marcus put his hand on Victoria's shoulder, a gesture that might have been support or a warning. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but found she had no words ready. Robert spoke again, his voice carrying authority that came from decades of being taken seriously. He said he had built his company by treating people with dignity, by understanding that every person in his organization mattered, from the executive suite to the factory floor. He said he had thought Victoria understood that, had thought her success came from intelligence and innovation, not from the kind of arrogance that made people small. He told her he was disappointed. The word landed like a stone. Disappointment from Robert Hutchins meant more than criticism from a dozen others. Victoria knew this. She had sought his approval when she was building her company, had modeled parts of her strategy on his advice. Hearing him say he was disappointed was worse than anger, worse than outrage. It meant she had failed a test she had not known she was taking. Derek tried to intervene, saying everyone was blowing this out of proportion, that Victoria had just been having a little fun, that no one was hurt. Patricia turned on him sharply, asking if he thought humiliation was harmless just because it was not physical. She asked if he would want someone to treat his children this way when they grew up and entered the workforce. Derek fell silent, his face reddening. Sharon moved away from the group, retreating to her table without a word. Other guests followed her lead, distancing themselves from the confrontation. Some left their tables entirely, moving toward the exit with murmured excuses. They were not leaving because of Ethan. They were leaving because standing in that room meant endorsing what Victoria had done, meant being associated with the kind of casual cruelty that could just as easily be turned on them someday. Victoria watched them go, her composure cracking. She told Robert he was being unfair, that she had built this company from nothing, that she employed hundreds of people and paid them well, that one joke did not erase all of that. Robert said it was not about the joke, it was about what the joke revealed. It revealed someone who saw people as instruments, as props to be used for entertainment or discarded when inconvenient. He said that kind of leadership created toxic cultures, the kind that drove talent away and left only people too desperate or too ambitious to care about how they were treated. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low, asking if they could discuss this privately. Victoria shook her head. She told Marcus that everyone here needed to understand they were overreacting, that she was not some villain for making one comment. Patricia said no one was calling her a villain. They were calling her thoughtless. They were pointing out that she had used her wedding, the most important day of her life, to publicly humiliate someone who could not defend himself without risking his job. Ethan cleared his throat softly. He told Victoria he did not need anyone to defend him. He said he had come here knowing what she intended, had accepted the invitation knowing it was meant to be a joke at his expense, but he had also come knowing that his presence would say something she had not anticipated. It would say that he was not ashamed of who he was. It would say that he refused to be invisible just because she wanted him to be. Victoria stared at him, her anger rising now, sharp and defensive. She asked what he wanted, if he had come here to ruin her wedding, to make her look bad in front of her guests. Ethan told her no. He said he came because his son deserved a father who did not run from humiliation. She had invited him as a joke, but he had turned that invitation into something else. He had turned it into a choice. The words settled over the room like dust after an explosion. Victoria realized then what had happened, what was still happening. Her wedding had become a referendum on her character. Every guest who left, every partner who looked at her with disappointment, every whispered conversation happening at tables across the ballroom, they were all adding up to a verdict she had not seen coming. She had thought she was in control. She had thought mocking Ethan would be easy, would be forgettable. Instead, she had given everyone a reason to question whether they wanted to work with someone who treated people this way. Robert excused himself, saying he needed some air. Patricia followed. 2 more investors left their table and headed toward the exit. Derek and Sharon stayed, but kept their distance, suddenly unwilling to be associated with Victoria's defense. Marcus stood beside his new wife, his expression unreadable, his hand still on her shoulder, but no longer offering comfort. Victoria looked around the ballroom, at the half-empty tables, at the guests who remained, but would not meet her eyes. She looked at Ethan, still standing calmly 3 feet away, not gloating, not angry, just present. She had wanted him to be a spectacle. Instead, he had turned her into one. Everything she had built, every relationship she had cultivated, every impression she had carefully managed, it was all cracking under the weight of this single moment. She felt something she had not felt in years. She felt powerless. The money, the success, the title, none of it could undo what had just happened. None of it could make Robert Hutchins respect her again. None of it could make Patricia Green forget what she had witnessed. Victoria had spent her life building an empire, and in 5 minutes, standing in the middle of her own wedding reception, she had watched it begin to crumble. The ballroom felt smaller now, the elegant space contracting under the weight of what had just happened. Victoria stood at the center of a circle that had formed around her and Ethan, a circle made not of people, but of judgment. The string quartet had stopped playing. Waiters hovered near the kitchen doors, uncertain whether to continue serving or retreat. Marcus remained at her side, but his presence felt more like obligation than support. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the crowd. Victoria tried to salvage what remained. She forced her voice into a lighter register, addressed the remaining guests with a smile that trembled at the edges. She told them this had all been a misunderstanding, that people were taking a simple moment of levity and turning it into something it was not. She said Ethan had been invited because she valued all her employees, because she believed in recognizing the people who kept the company running smoothly. The words sounded hollow even as she spoke them, excuses dressed up as explanations. A few guests nodded politely, the kind of nod that meant nothing, that was given out of social reflex rather than agreement. Most remained silent. Derek had disappeared entirely, slipping out during the confrontation with Robert and Patricia. Sharon sat at her table, staring at her untouched plate, her hands folded in her lap. The investors who had left were not coming back. The ones who remained did so because leaving now would be more awkward than staying, but their faces told Victoria they had already made their assessment. Ethan stood quietly through Victoria's attempt at damage control, his expression unchanged. He was not angry. He was not triumphant. He simply existed in the space, present in a way that made everything Victoria said sound defensive. She realized, with a cold clarity that cut through her rising panic, that his silence was more damaging than any accusation could have been. He did not need to argue with her. His presence was the argument. Victoria turned to him directly, lowering her voice, trying to create the illusion of a private conversation, even though everyone was still watching. She asked what he wanted from her, what it would take to make this right. She could hear the desperation in her own voice and hated herself for it. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and calm. He told her he did not want anything from her. He said he had not come here expecting apologies or compensation. He had come here to prove something to himself. She asked what he meant. Ethan told her he had a son, a boy named Tyler, who was 7 years old. He said Tyler asked questions about the world, about why some people lived in big houses while others lived in small apartments, about why some kids had new clothes while he wore hand-me-downs. Ethan said he could not change Tyler's circumstances, could not give him the life that children in wealthy families took for granted, but he could teach his son how to carry himself in a world that would judge him for being poor. Victoria listened, her face frozen in an expression she could not read. Ethan continued, saying that Tyler would grow up and encounter people like her, people who believed that money gave them the right to look down on others. When that happened, Ethan wanted his son to remember this day. He wanted Tyler to know that his father had walked into a room full of people who thought they were better than him and had stood his ground. He wanted his son to understand that dignity was not something that could be bought or sold, that it came from within, from knowing your own worth regardless of what others believed. The words were simple, delivered without anger or righteousness, but they cut through the ballroom like a blade. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a crack in the armor she had built over years of climbing corporate ladders and crushing competitors. She saw herself through Ethan's eyes, saw what she had become in pursuit of success. She had built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, had earned respect from investors and fear from rivals, had created an empire that bore her name. And she had used all of that power to humiliate a man who cleaned her office. Marcus stepped forward, his voice low but firm. He told Ethan that he appreciated him coming, that what Victoria had done was wrong, and that he hoped Ethan could accept his apology, even if Victoria could not bring herself to offer one. The words stung Victoria, the implication that her new husband had to apologize on her behalf, that he saw her as someone incapable of basic decency. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but the words would not come. Ethan nodded at Marcus, acknowledging the gesture without accepting it. He said he did not need an apology. He said he understood that people made mistakes, that pride made them do things they later regretted. But he also said that those mistakes revealed character, showed what people truly believed when they thought there would be no consequences. He looked at Victoria as he said this, not with contempt, but with something worse, with pity. A woman near the back of the remaining crowd began to clap. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, the tentative applause of someone unsure if others would join. But then another person joined, then another. Within seconds, a dozen guests were clapping, their applause not loud or enthusiastic, but steady and genuine. They were not celebrating Ethan's words. They were acknowledging his courage, recognizing what it must have cost him to stand in this room and speak his truth. Victoria felt the applause like a physical blow. Her wedding, the event she had planned for months, the celebration that was supposed to cement her status among the city's elite, had become a moment of validation for the man she had invited as a joke. The guests were not clapping for her. They were clapping for him. The reversal was complete. She had tried to make Ethan small, and instead, she had made herself invisible. Ethan turned toward the exit, his movement slow and deliberate. He did not rush. He did not slink away in embarrassment. He walked with his head up, his shoulders back, moving through the ballroom with the same quiet dignity he had carried when he entered. Guests stepped aside to let him pass, some nodding in respect, others simply watching in silence. As he reached the door, he stopped and looked back one final time. His eyes found Victoria across the room. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two people separated by wealth and status, but connected by this single, defining moment. Ethan did not smile. He did not offer forgiveness or condemnation. He simply acknowledged her presence, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow carried across the entire ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of what had happened settled over the room like fog, thick and inescapable. Victoria stood in the center of it all, surrounded by the trappings of her success, the flowers and champagne and imported linens, and felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Marcus touched her arm, a gesture meant to comfort, but she pulled away. She could not bear kindness right now, could not accept sympathy when what she felt was shame. The remaining guests began to disperse, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. They collected their belongings, made polite excuses, and filtered toward the exits. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom that had held 300 people was down to fewer than 50. The caterers began clearing tables, their movements efficient and discreet, accustomed to events that ended early. The string quartet packed their instruments. The wedding planner appeared at Victoria's elbow, asking if she wanted to proceed with the dinner service or cancel the remainder of the evening. Victoria told her to cancel everything. Her voice was flat, devoid of the authority it usually carried. The wedding planner nodded and disappeared to handle the logistics. Marcus suggested they go upstairs to their suite, get away from the emptying ballroom, try to salvage something from the day. Victoria shook her head. She told him she needed a moment alone. He started to protest, then thought better of it. He kissed her forehead, a brief touch that felt like goodbye, and left her standing in the middle of the abandoned reception. Victoria looked around at the half-eaten meals, the untouched champagne, the centerpieces that no one had bothered to admire. She had spent $150,000 on this wedding, had hired the best vendors, had curated every detail to perfection. And none of it mattered. None of it had protected her from the consequences of her own arrogance. She had believed that her success insulated her, that her position gave her permission to treat people however she wanted. Ethan had proven her wrong with nothing more than his presence and a few simple words. She thought about what Robert had said, about how this revealed her character. She thought about Patricia's disappointment, about the investors who had left, about the partnerships that would never recover from this. She had spent years building relationships, cultivating trust, creating a network that would support her ambitions. In one afternoon, standing in her wedding dress, she had watched it unravel. But more than the business implications, more than the damaged relationships and lost opportunities, Victoria felt something else. She felt the absence of respect. The guests had not left because they feared her or because they disagreed with her business decisions. They had left because they could not respect someone who used power to humiliate the powerless. They had left because they saw in her something small and ugly, something that no amount of money could disguise. Victoria walked to the nearest table and sat down, her dress spreading around her like a white pool. She picked up a glass of champagne someone had abandoned and held it without drinking. The liquid caught the chandelier light, sparkling and golden, beautiful and meaningless. She had everything she had ever wanted: the company, the success, the wedding, the status. And sitting there alone in an empty ballroom, surrounded by the ruins of her celebration, she understood what Ethan had tried to tell her. Wealth could not save you from yourself. Power could not compensate for emptiness. You could build an empire and still be poor in the ways that mattered. Ethan had walked into her wedding with nothing but a second-hand suit and his dignity, and he had walked out richer than she would ever be. Not in money, but in something more fundamental, in self-respect, in the knowledge that he had faced contempt and refused to bend. Victoria set down the champagne glass and stood. Her wedding was over. The guests were gone. What remained was the question of who she would be when she woke up tomorrow, when the shame faded and the choices became clear. She could learn from this, could let it change her, could become someone worthy of the respect she had always demanded but never earned, or she could bury it, move on, pretend it had never happened. The decision was hers. But standing there in her wedding dress, Alone in a ballroom built for celebration, Victoria knew one thing with absolute certainty. Today, she had been the joke, and everyone had laughed.